What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, or wherever you are, and whatever time it is, and welcome back to yet another video with you, man, Immersionholic. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our faction overview series for the Divide Et Impera overhaul mod for Total War Rome 2. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, the faction overviews are back, and they're coming back strong. Today, everybody, we are targeting the Arverni. That's right. Keep in mind, this is our first faction overview for the 1.3.1 update for Divide Et Impera, the 1.3.1b patch, that is. The Arverni were overhauled in 1.3 DEI, so it's time that we jumped on in, started checking out some of the barbarian factions in Divide Et Impera and seeing what the bloody go is with them. Please do keep in mind, though, all of the faction overviews I have ever done, while they are all still relevant, almost all of the factions have been altered quite significantly. So I will be going through the majority of my faction overviews and redoing them. I'm not going to list every specific little difference from a certain patch to a different patch. I'm just going to go through like it's a blank slate and come on in and hit you with those faction overviews. The only exclusion I'm leaving to that would be Carthage, as we did Carthage in the 1.3 update. There hasn't been any significant changes to Carthage since. I don't believe there'll be any more, but who knows. So I'm going to be redoing the faction overviews, and we're going to be completing the ones that we haven't done as well. So there'll be a mixture of those coming in and out. I will be keeping the same format for the faction overviews, and in general I will be just trying to make it as short as possible, but I mean, I've already wasted almost 5 minutes, so anyway. I just wanted to let you guys know that the faction overviews are coming, so please comment your requests down below on what faction you would like to see next. I'm thinking that very soon in the near future we're going to be targeting Rome, although I do want to wait until the next update, so please do keep in mind as well. There are more updates coming to DEIs, seriously big updates as well. I don't know specifics on exactly what factions are being adjusted, but I do hear rumors from time to time, and that helps direct my attention to certain different factions, so that's very helpful when I do hear it. But it basically means that sometimes you're not going to see faction overviews on a certain faction for quite a while. For example, with Athens, I did say a long time ago that they were going to be quote-unquote next, but then before I could actually do it, I heard that they were going to be overhauled, and Athens has been overhauled, although I've heard that there's still some more changes coming, so that's why we still haven't even done Athens. But anyway, please do keep in mind that there is reasoning behind all of the decisions on what factions I choose to do. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, now that we've got that little update on the faction overviews out of the way, let's jump on in and check out the Gauls, specifically the Arverni. Alright everybody, well, to get us started, before we jump into the part 1 section, let's talk about the buffs and debuffs that the Gauls receive. So the Arverni, the quintessential Gauls I would argue, are part of the Gallic cultural group, which is essentially the Gauls. All of the Gallic factions, the Scodici, the Boii, Nervii, Galatians, and the Arverni share the Gallic horsemanship buff, which gives you +1 experience rank for Gallic cavalry recruits. Very important. Very helpful in your early game, as you will rely on cav quite heavily to help you gain an edge over your neighbors. We then also share the Opera buff, which increases immigration to capitals. Interesting buff. I'm not entirely sure if it's all that beneficial, but it's there, so it's not too bad in my opinion. The Arverni themselves, though, what buffs do they specifically get? Well, down here in the bottom right hand corner you can see they get the Gallic craftsmanship buff. This increases your income from metal resource building chains. Then we also have the Superior Ones buff, where they can form client states. Now, not everybody can form a client state in Divide Et Impera. It is a cultural based thing. Despite this limitation for the majority of the cultures, though, the Arverni actually can do it, so that can be helpful if you would prefer to do that instead of trying to occupy a territory directly. It saves you a little bit of trouble, potentially, at least in the short term. And then they receive the negative debuff of internal power struggles, where you get public order penalties from Celtic culture. A little bit of a pain this one is, because obviously you want your territory to be your culture, So it's a bit of a pain, but overall, public order is pretty easy to manage, at least in vanilla Divide Et Impera, in my opinion. So not really a terrible debuff. You have some very nice buffs overall. The big one would be increased income from metal resource building chains. This just pushes you even more into wanting an industrial economy, which is now really what is the quintessential thing for barbarians to do. The majority of barbarian factions, at least from my research and from what I've been able to figure out myself, they benefit from focusing on industry. It depends on what resources you have available, depends on your provinces as well. Some barbarians still rely on agriculture, but generally speaking, industry is the way to go. So anyway, without any further ado, let's jump on in to the part 1 section of this video where we check out the campaign overview for the Arverni. Alright everyone, here we are at the campaign overview section of this video. Remember, timestamps are in the description as always for pretty much all of my videos. Here we are with the Arverni in Gaul, the heart of Gaul one would argue, and we are let me hear you say it, a one-hitter quitter. A one-hitter quitter faction. As is the majority of factions, but I really like when it's a one-hitter quitter. It makes it more interesting, a little bit more intense when you start off. Makes it very, very tricky. So, this is your settlement right here. That's right, we still have the painting tools, don't you worry. We have a single army stationed inside of your city, so you're going to want to move it outside of your city straight away, because public order sucks when you have an army in there. It starts off manned by your king. He has his Gallic early royal cavalry, so best cav you can get straight out the bat. Try to use this general when you can. He has a Gallic light cavalry unit, which is actually a skirmisher unit. 120 men in it, so that's very nice. He then has a Gallic naked spearman unit and a Gallic skirmisher, which is a javelinman unit. Interesting note, you actually can't recruit any more Gallic naked spearmen until you upgrade your barracks, so just a little interesting tidbit. One thing you will notice though is that we can actually see a fair bit of territory despite us having only one city. Nemesis doesn't have all of that line of sight range. What does have a bit of line of sight range though is the city of Lamonum, which is an ally. That's right. Let's click on your starting province here in the province of Aquitania. Nemesis is your capital, like I said. You have gold here as well. Very, very lucky resource to have. One of the best in the game. We then have Lamonum over here, your allies, the Pictones. And then we have Bredegala. So your starting province is actually pretty bad. It's very small, only 3 cities. You do have war horses next to you in Lamonum, so that's nice. And you have gold, which is fantastic. But you're still going to be pretty limited in what your core province can really produce and provide overall. Really, you want a minimum of 4 cities in a province. I think I've only ever seen one place that goes up to 5, which is Africa or something, or maybe Egypt. Or do they only do 4? I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, 3 cities or 3 regions in a province isn't ideal, but it is what it is. As I said, let's go to your diplomacy. You have the Pictones over here who are in a trade agreement with you, and your defensive ally. Not your military ally, just a defensive ally. Now that is the only diplomatic relations you have besides the Ajui. The Ajui are at war with you. And the Ajui have an ally, the Carnutes, so Canutes over here. The Canutes and the Pictones are not involved in your war yet. However, the Canutes do not like you. They will almost certainly join the war with the Ajui against you. The Pictones can't join the war against the Ajui unless you can try to call them to war. But chances are that they're not going to unless you pay them. It's a moderate chance straight away, so you can definitely pay them to get involved. It's up to you if you want them to or not. You have a bunch more neighbors, many of whom you're same blood with, so that means that you can confederate with any of them who have this little handshaking symbol where everyone's just holding hands being happy. Let's confederate. And you will notice as well that the majority, well actually it's not even majority, it's a bit of a half and half. So you have the Ajui and the Canutes that don't like you. You could see by this very upset angry red face here. But then you also have the Volcae to the south who don't like you. Besides that, you do have some neutral neighbors and whatnot. You got the Massalians down here, the foreign colonizers coming in to Gaul, try and bring their Greek wine and philosophy over here. We don't want it. Stay over here in your little city. Very nice city to have though, and it's a fun faction to play as. But anyway, so that is your starting location, your starting region, and your starting diplomacy. Nemesis, like I said, has gold, and it has a population of 25,000 at the game start. Your foreign population is actually in the negative, well, not in the negative, but it's going down. I guess you could say it's decreasing over time. All of your other populations are looking pretty good. Your noble class, the Rix, is at 1,000. Kind of limited, but you're not going to be using that population for a while anyway. The Pagi population, I'm sure I'm butchering these pronunciations, but it is what it is. You guys know what to expect by now. Is at 3,000. These guys are actually your warrior class. These are the ones who are going to be your very good, not necessarily elite, but very good units. So like your axemen and your very heavy spearmen, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Your civitate, your tier 3 population, is your basic low tier civilians, citizens. So they will make up the majority of your armies in the form of being such as spearmen. For example, your Gallic Light spearmen, 300 civitate per unit. They come from that population. So you can make big blob armies pretty early on if you like. You're just going to be going through your population pretty quick. So make sure you win your battles. But anyway, that's your starting city, your starting situation overall. Another thing to add to your starting situation is that more often than not, Bertigala over here, owned by the Vivisci, or Vivisci, I believe it's Ski, hard C, they often will declare war on you. I don't know what it is. I test these campaigns out on normal difficulty, but the majority of the time when I've played the Arverni, to test them out for you guys, the Vivisci get involved pretty much turn 2. They will declare war. The Ajui over here usually send an army down first if you don't attack them. So what I recommend as your start is that you focus on using these awesome little geographical things that you might miss, but you actually have a river right here blocking the Ajui. So you have an awesome little bridge crossing right here. You can use that, keep your army right there next to it. You can see right there, you have to cross it to get towards Brabrakti. Keep your army there, let the Ajui attack you, and then you can counterattack and hit their city when they don't have the supporting army. And you have the same thing over here on your western border. The Vivisci have to cross a river right here, in that little tiny blue circle, and they have to cross it to get to you. So even though you start off surrounded basically by 2 enemies, I mean 3 if we include the good people of Kennebum. These names for Galia, they crack me up, man. Like this one right here, Eolia Bona, that's interesting. Nemnedum. Alright, I can't really make anything up about that. Brabrakti, I just like that city. It's a cool name. Anyone who's played Celtic Kings Rage of War, you might remember Brabrakti being in that game. That was amazing. So that's kind of what's got me to be a little fanboyish about Brabrakti. And in fact, I do recommend you try to make that your capital. Very defensible. Has 2 bridge crossings down here, so you have a nice river down here, another river up here as well, another one right here. So if you want to maintain your empire in Gaul, Brabrakti is not a bad capital to move to. And you can move your capital. Don't forget, you can do that just by clicking on the city or whatever, and up in this little corner here, you'll be able to change it. But that's because we can't do anything here, obviously, because it is your capital. But it's definitely worth considering doing that. And the province that Brabrakti is in Gallia, and it has 4 cities inside of it. So not bad at all, and it starts off with 35,000 people in Brabrakti, so 10,000 more than what you get, which is always going to be a big improvement. Now, like I said earlier in the video, your economy is going to be one of industry, especially as the Arverni, because you get the benefits to metalwork. In addition, you start off with gold. Previously, gold also gave you lead, however, that seems to have changed, as it's at least not officially listed. Let's check out diplomacy and trade just to make sure it's not a thing. Yeah, it isn't. That is interesting, because before, gold used to provide lead at the same time, no matter what, but at least at this settlement it isn't. And it doesn't unlock later on. No, it just gives you gold talents. That must have been changed, but anyway. As you can see when I hover over these different sections as well, it demonstrates your wealth increases from manufacturing or the industry tab. So basically you want to build buildings that will promote industry percentages overall, just like you can for agriculture. You could do the same thing for industry as well. However, like I said, your starting city isn't all that ideal because it's tiny. You can only ever have 4 slots in it anyway. It's not a very good capital, so I would try to unite Aquitania when you can, make it like an industrial province, especially with the war horses coming in, but then make Bibracte your actual capital of Gaul. That's my recommendation anyway, but that's the majority of your campaign in a nutshell. Something else we can talk about quickly is your family tree. We have Oxtaios, your king. He's 38 years old at the beginning of the campaign. He is married to one Ientu. I believe that's an I. Yeah, Ientu. She's 35 years old. Not necessarily the best age to be expecting more children to come out of the two of them. Depends on the mods that you're using, like 12 turns per year and whatnot. That's tending... it's more likely to give you more kids because they'll live longer. But anyway, something to think about. Your king and queen are getting a little bit old. However, you have an 18-year-old son in his prime, and this is Omniorix. Yes, I nailed that. Woohoo, we got it. So yeah, you have this champion who's up and coming. He will be the future king of the Arverni if you don't screw it up. Oh, and very quickly, let's look at your politics. You start off as a chiefdom, and I recommend you stay as a chiefdom, at least until you become an empire. Tribal confederation. The -10 upkeep cost for all armies is nice, but the -10 loyalty for political parties is a pain. And you need to spend more money to recruit per unit, which is actually a big thing about the Arverni. Your units are cheaper because you're a barbarian faction, so I wouldn't want the cost going up anymore. Trade income from trade agreements is nice, but it doesn't matter. You're not going to be a trade-focused empire anyway. +3 public order would be nice, but that -10 loyalty is pretty heavy. And if you're not used to dealing with the loyalty of certain factions and whatnot, I wouldn't bother doing it. The chiefdom political government is fine, gives you even bonuses to military research, which you need to do as the Arverni. You need to power through your military research, at least for the early game. -5 loyalty, a lot easier to manage, and then the +1 experience rank for all recruits. That's very, very big. So you're going to be getting level 2 cavalry first off, straight away. Turn 1, you can get level 2 cav, which is pretty awesome. +5% tax rate is good. Taxes are going to be a big part of your income, so definitely want that boosted. The upkeep cost does suck, but your tax rate will almost definitely make up for it, in my opinion. Nothing else to show you guys regarding all of this, so we already went over all of these. Apparently our leader is a selfish faction leader. I'm not sure if, off the top of my head, if this changes or if it's random every time you start a campaign, or if this one's set, but I know the traits of all of the political factions are random whenever you start a campaign, so that's why I don't bother going over them in faction overviews. But anyway, general sort of tips, at least for the early game. I would basically try to defend along your bridges, like I said before, and then while you're doing this, go to your research tab, go to war exercises, and get the advanced saddle technology as quickly as you can. You'll get it within 5 turns. After you get that, go to the mosses, upgrade your barracks to a meeting ground. You want the meeting ground because then it's going to give you access to all of the units you'll need to win wars. You'll get axemen, which are a big deal to you. We'll talk about why soon, but you need axemen. You'll also get some heavy spearmen right here. And these are heavy shield wall spearmen, so they discipline actual professional soldiers. You get some Gallic heavy spearmen, a little bit more kind of loose, but they can still form up a good formation and whatnot. You'll also get Gallic veteran freemen, which have a javelin, and they're a good spear unit, so you have that as well. And you'll get heavy skirmishers. The skirmisher, like javelin unit and your archer, you can already get. So just in all, you really want to get this barracks level as quickly as you can. Gonna take you 11 turns to do it, 5 turns of research, 6 turns of just building, but it is worth it in my opinion. So I wouldn't overfill your army. Get yourself about 16 units, 16 to 18. Put them on the river right here. Just have them chill out. Wait for the Ajui to come attack you. You'll even have your garrison of the Mosses come in and help you at that range, which is very nice. You can use the garrison as basically fodder if you like. And then on the western side over here, you can set up a smaller army as well. Of at least just like a few spearmen and try to get yourself a bunch of skirmishers, something like that to hold over here when the Vivisci do come knocking for you, and they will eventually. You need to be very lucky for them not to declare war on you. But basically, once the Ajuri come down and hit you, hopefully by then you can start recruiting heavy spearmen and axemen. Spend a couple turns just recruiting them after you've beat the Ajui, and then we want to counterattack and go ahead and take Bibracte. It's a walled settlement, so leave a small garrison here to defend it, then rush your army back on down, deal with the Vivisci if they've declared war on you. If they haven't, then go on ahead, dealing with the Ajui allies, and then solidifying the rest of Northern Gaul, or do whatever you like. Really, at that point, that's where things kind of start to become a little bit more natural, where you can be like, oh, do I want to go and mess with Massalia? Do I want to deal with the Gauls to the south, where we're getting into Celtiberian territory? That's up to you. But Bibracte must fall very quickly in your campaign. If you don't have Bibracte within the first 20 turns, then I would say you're going to really struggle and probably lose your campaign. The Ajui just keep coming for you, and it's very hard to get peace with them unless you obliterate their armies, which you can if you abuse the rivers here, or you have the forest as well to organize ambushes, but that is entirely on you to do. One more thing which is very crucial is that you start off with 20,000 whatever this is, denarii I guess we'll call it. This is quite a lot of money, and one thing that you get to do as the barbarians is you get to recruit any agent you like, and I mean one of every agent. So get yourself a spy, get yourself a dignitary, get yourself a champion, or what they call a war maiden. It's up to you how you use them. I would 100% send your spy up here at the very least, just so they can watch the Bibracte armies. You can see what their army composition is going to be. I personally like to send my war maiden down here to Bertigala to keep an eye on their armies, but it's up to you. Your dignitary, I would definitely keep in the Mosses to try and control the public order issues, because at turn 1 you actually do have quite a few cultural, not cultural issues, just public order issues. You start off in winter, so it's bad straight up. Your taxes are at -7 for public order, so that's actually quite severe. Just generally speaking, you're going to be in the negative very quickly of public order, and you do not need rebellions going on while you're in the middle of fighting a two-front war. At least what's very likely to be a two-front war. At the very least, you know the Ajui are coming. That's guaranteed. The Vivisci, not guaranteed, but very, very likely that they will. So anyway, that's my advice for your early game. Getting to mid to late game, though, that's where you're going to start encountering Rome down here. I mean, that's more of a late game thing, where they don't really expand all that much up into the north. They'll follow the coastline into Iberia because they fight Carthage, and then they'll also hop across Sicily over here down into Africa. So they actually do focus very heavily on the Punic Wars, and they won't come too much up into Gaul unless wars drag them that way. So try to avoid confronting them and drawing their ire. The mid-game arch nemesis for you will be Massalia. Massalia is actually a bit of a underdog faction that almost always becomes a juggernaut. I don't know what it is about Massalia. I guess it's surrounded by barbarians who don't have as good of a front line as them, or their auto-resolve units are just so good, but Massalia does very, very well in almost every single campaign I tested this on. Like, they'll spread out all throughout the Alps, going up through the Po Valley, going down into Iberia. They go everywhere. And so you might want to try and shut them down early. You can get their cities in their province pretty easily, and that way you wrap up southern Gaul, maybe get yourself some non-aggression with the Iberians across the mountain range there. But anyway, I think that's all I have in terms of advice to give you on the campaign while we're here. We'll talk a little bit more about general tips in the verdict. But now, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and jump into the part 2 section of this video, where we talk about the military of the Arverni. Alrighty everybody, here we are at the part 2 section of this video, where we'll be checking out the military of the Arverni. Gonna be checking out their land forces momentarily. However, first off, I want to let you know about their reforms and the naval situation for the Arverni. So the reform is the Natos reforms. This happens at Imperium level 4, so you have to expand your kingdom until you get to Imperium level 4, which you can see at the faction government screen, and then you have to wait until turn 90, and that is when the reforms will happen. The reforms aren't a massive deal for the Arverni, as you get the majority of your units before it, but it does offer you some late game variants that do have slightly better stats overall. Not as much of a big deal for you. Moving on though, your navy, not really worth mentioning too much, and that's why I'm not even going to bother showing you guys any footage of it, but it is worth considering that it isn't terrible, considering that you're a Gallic faction. You have a single spear wielding melee ship, you have swords, and you have axemen on 2 different ships as well, and then plus you have 1 slinger unit. All of your units have 120 men in each, except for the slingers, which have just 80, and then you have a general unit, which is actually a very heavy sword unit at 120 men as well. All of your ships have 900 HP. So it's actually not too terrible. You can try to use it for maybe a little bit of raiding or attacking port settlements, but keep in mind you still will have a pretty big disadvantage when it comes to numbers, unless you have a massive navy. So your stats for your units on your navy aren't that bad. It's just they're very small, and your ships still don't have very good HP, at least not compared to Mediterranean powers and whatnot. But anyway, in general, avoid using your navy, and if you do, don't rely on it heavily. Don't gamble your powerful armies on naval invasions and whatnot, especially since the barbarian factions don't get access to naval supply ships, which means that you're going to suffer attrition. But anyway, let's talk about your land units. This is your general's unit, at least one of your general's unit. You get access to 4 different generals. You can either get a sword unit, a spear unit, or you can get 1 of 2 cavalry units. Oh my goodness, that is not what we wanted. Go back, please. Misclick. So we have the Gallic late royal cavalry right here. This is the late variant, not the early. I wanted to show you the best that you can get at all, ever in your campaign for your generals. This is your general here. Got some badass feathers on top. G'day mate, how you going? So your stats for this unit are actually quite good. They're comparable to the Remy Cav of the Nervi. To regular DEI players, especially regular to this region of Gaul, you will know the Remy Cav are pretty fantastic, and they used to be very overpowered, although they have been balanced a little. These guys are very similar. Excellent heavy melee cavalry. Good for long engagements, but they still can do very well on the charge, and will help you deal with the light infantry of the enemy in the early game. Overall, looking fantastic. As does every single faction in DEI at this point. There isn't a single DEI faction that has not been overhauled since the inception of the mod, visually and just statistically, unit-wise, everything. So You're gonna hear the repetitiveness of me saying these look amazing, but they always do in DEI. They're just downright friggin' great, and it is what it is. The Arverni units look very, very ragtag, but I mean they're Gauls, right? There's not going to be uniform. There's not going to be any beautiful red cloaks flowing down. Just ignore that guy's red cloak. Anyway, there's not going to be a massive uniform of red cloaks flowing across the hills as they come charging down. So anyway, that's your general unit. Fantastic unit. I'm not even going to bother going over the stats. It's just a very good heavy melee cam unit, but it's the best that you get in that regard. We'll talk a little bit more about your cavalry at the end of this section, but as you can see, we don't have a very big roster. I believe when I counted, it was like 20-something troops, 25, 6 or 7, around there. Less than that, actually. Yeah, it's less than 20, because this is not even 2 rows. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay. So 15 in the first row, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 units. And you do get access to a ballista and a scorpion, but I didn't bother checking that out. But anyway, very small roster. But you are barbarians, so that's what you get playing barbarian faction. You're not going to get a lot of variety. One thing that you will notice about the Arverni, though, is that since the 1.3 overhaul of all of your barbarian factions, the Arverni are now more so specialized in spearmen. There they are, the chunky boys. We will talk a lot about them momentarily. And you will notice that there is quite a distinction in the spearmen as well, where one side is looking quite professional and tight-knit, and the other side is looking like an absolute mess of just half-naked dudes in spears and shields. But anyway, let's start off with your skirmishes, because we have nothing to talk about. Oh man, this is tragic, but your Gallic archers, despite it being a terrible low-tier unit, they still look nice with a good amount of variety, as is the case with all of your units. Looking badass, almost looking as ripped as your man in Measureholic. For sure. Anyway, don't keep these guys in melee. I don't know why they have that really high armor piercing damage at 12. I guess they have axes or daggers that are good at armor piercing, but melee attack of 5 makes it negligible. Range is terrible at 155. That's really low for an archer, so I wouldn't really use archers unless you want to use them to use that flaming shot, which I do have access to. So I guess that's nice. Besides that, they don't really have any benefits unless you just want to use an archer for archer reasons. Slingers! We then have your only slinger unit that you get access to, at least as a recruitable unit, and this is your Gallic Slinger Spearman unit. So these guys are actually quite useful in that not only are they slingers with 190 range, which is good standard, nothing special in terms of missile damage at 11, although they do have a slightly above average armor piercing at 6 instead of 5. But they can actually defend themselves against cavalry. A melee attack of 7, defense of 14. Their armor is only at 8, so pretty negligible, but they do have a large shield as well. So if these guys get charged by cavalry, they will probably still lose unless it's really light cav. But, I mean, you have 2 units of these bad boys defend themselves. They might actually pull it off. So that's helpful. 175 men in all of these skirmisher units, FYI. We then move on to skirmishers. Yes, we hear you, my friend. This is your first set of javelinmen that you can recruit on turn 1 in the campaign. Again, same deal as the archers, really terrible overall, but you again have that high armor piercing damage at 12. So I mean, if you can boost the stats to where your attack is decent around 8 or 10 or something, maybe they can be useful in like backstabbing armored units such as the Romans and whatnot. Ready! But then we upgrade to your Gallic heavy skirmishers. These bad boys are actually heavy. Not all that heavy though. I mean, their armor is only at 10, so it's a bit of a stretch calling them heavy skirmishers, although I guess for a skirmisher they are heavy. Melee defense at 9, attack at 11, so this is a unit that's actually okay at its melee attack and defense. No armor piercing though, just 2, so they lose the armor piercing tradition of the other skirmishers. Overall, The Arverni suck when it comes to skirmishing, but your slingers can be very helpful. So I would use them, but I mean, you're going to be encountering other slingers on the battlefield that are pretty much just as good. So no standouts here, but they are still useful. Now let's move on to your chunky boys. These are the lads, the chads. This right here is your army. Spearmen, 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 and some more spearmen. Yeah, we hear you, mate. Some Gallic light spearmen. These guys very lightly armored, but they've got the big heavy shields. Got 4 eyes right there. 300 men per unit, no javelins, but a big melee defense of 17, which is pretty big for a starting unit. Although it is kind of normal now of some barbarian factions. Bonus versus cav of 10 and elephants of 10, so that's nice. This will be your main line for the first 10 turns or so. But then after that, you will get access to Gallic Veteran Freemen and Gallic Heavy Spearmen, which we'll talk about in a second. First, we need to talk about the Gallic Naked Spears. These guys are interesting, not because they're naked necessarily, but because they have a very high attack of 14. I guess because they're naked, they're feeling a little bit more intense, and they feel the need for speed, so they know that they need to kill quickly. This is not a mainline unit. This is a flanking unit or an ambushing unit. Do not use these guys as your main line. They have an armor of 1, which means they don't have an armor. Melee defense of 14 is okay, but if they're defending themselves, it's not good. They actually charge quite well with a charge bonus of 29, so that's a very hefty charge bonus. Base morale is at 51, so excellent morale. And they have 3 sets of javelins to throw, ammunition of 3. This is an ambushing unit. I kind of wish that they had stealth capabilities on the battlefield, but, well, they don't. Guerrilla deployment would have been nice, but, oh well, they don't. But yeah, that can be handy, just don't use it as your main line. What you can use as your main line, though, is literally anything else moving forward. You have your Gallic Veteran Freeman, who used to be just your Freeman Spearman from Vanilla Rome 2. These guys are a good staple mainline unit, pretty cheap, low tier. Armor is only at 15, so this isn't your best. This is what you use when you just need a cheap mainline unit to hold the line for a little while. I mean, the defense is at 19, so that's an amazing start, and it's going to go up with good generals as well, so it's actually quite good. Relatively cost effective, and you do have a single javelin that you get to throw. No special abilities that are worth mentioning. Bonus versus cav and elephants is at 12 for both. But yeah, you do have some good defense there. But then we jump up to your Gallic Heavy Spearmen. Now these guys, you may as well use these guys for 2 reasons. Number 1, they have better armor at 20, which 5 increase, yeah, not massive, but it is substantial. Besides that, they have all of the exact same statistics of the Gallic Veteran Freemen, except for one thing: they do not have a javelin, which you would think would be a bit of a deal breaker. However, you could do defensive formation, and this is where your kind of secret weapon of the Arverni comes in, where the majority of your spear and phalanx wielding units have this ability or similar abilities. So it will lower your attack, but it will improve your defense massively and your morale. So if you want to hold a line, use Gallic Heavy Spearmen. You can get them as soon as you build your level 2 barracks, like I told you to do in the campaign section. From there, we jump up to some seriously professional spearmen, where we have the Gallic, early Gallic Shield Wall Spearmen. This is where the units get smaller, only 200 men for all of the upcoming spear units here. But these guys have the Get your shields up! Shield Wall. They have the Shield Wall ability. Very nice ability to have. Very similar to the last ability we're just looking at. Morale is not increased though. That is a key difference. It does not increase morale. It increases your defense a lot. Put up the shield wall! But yeah, morale stays the same. And the formation is still slightly different compared to the defensive formation, where it's a little bit shorter, not as large in width and whatnot. And we all know that a good width is essential. So anyway, Fantastic unit to hold the line though. No javelin unfortunately, and they do have the discipline trait down here in the bottom left. Does your last one? Your last, yeah, the Gallic Heavy Spearmen do. As do the Veteran Freemen, but then all the units before it do not. So, discipline isn't all that crazy. A lot of your units have it, to be fair. But yeah, these guys are just quite chunky with the stats and whatnot overall. Get out of the formation. Yeah, it's a pretty solid upgrade overall. But I mean, if you're just gonna use Gallic Heavy Spearmen, they will do a very good job, and they have 300 men in their unit. So it does become a bit of a debate on which one do you want to use. But the shield wall ability is fantastic. We then move on to the late Gallic shield wall spearmen. Very similar. The only difference is that they have one less melee defense, and they have 5 more armor. So this is where, if you're going up, say, against like a skirmishing faction, or a faction that sucks with armor piercing, that's where it's going to be better to use them. But you can see some of the chainmails coming out as well of your units. Big shield still. But you still have the nice spears as well. But not quite pikes. Unfortunately, you don't have them as the Arverni. We then jump up to the early Gallic Noble Shield Wall. These guys obviously can do the shield wall ability. Besides that, they're going to be slightly better in stats. 35 armor instead of 23, so that's instead of 25, sorry, and that's very substantial. Base round 51 and melee defensive 19. So these guys are really where you want professional armies to be consisting of. This is your late game main frontline units. Very nice unit to have if you can afford to get it.
Ready for battle!
Then you have the late variant right here. Let's get a close up of these bad boys. If you can, this is what you would like to have fielding them against Roman legions to hold the line, but I mean, really, any of your disciplined units will do. And comparing them, you're just basically going to see an increase of stats across the board by 1, 2, and 3 in some cases, such as your armor being at 38 instead of 35. So it's a decent increase. I'm not sure if it's worth the money and investment, because you do have cheaper but still cost-effective professional spearmen down there. So basically what we're seeing from the Arverni already is you need spearmen to hold the line, while you need cavalry or some other type of unit to flank around, such as your naked spearmen or any of your swordsmen, which is what we're going to talk about now. Here we have the Gallic Clubmen. These guys are very cheap, 300 men per unit. They do have a javelin, which is nice, but their main interest is that they have armor piercing damage. Now they're not going to take on a Roman legion hand to head, but if you get them in the rear of heavily armored units, it will help you out a lot. Unfortunately, their melee attack and defense is atrocious at 5 and 6 respectively, so I would try to get them with a general that has boosts to melee attack and defense. But that's your Gallic Clubman, first kind of levy tier unit that you'll get access to, that wields a club or a sword.
Axe warriors!
Gallic Axemen. Unfortunately, this is your only Gallic axe unit that you get access to. Now, you can recruit mercenary axemen in your home province, so that does help, although you don't get many of them. And then as you expand, you'll find more axemen, depending on where you go and whatnot. But your axemen are going to be very crucial throughout the entirety of your campaign, because they are your big armor-piercing, damaging units. And you'll notice I mentioned armor piercing a lot, and that's because you're next to some armor juggernauts. You have Carthage to your south in Iberia. You got Massalia to your southeast in southern Gaul, and then you have Rome to the east in Italy. These are juggernaut factions that, if they don't fight each other, they all do well. If they do fight each other, then one of the three will become the top dog. Sometimes 2 of the 3. They'll ally and take out the other. You need good armor piercing. If you just send 1,000 low-tier spears that don't have any armor piercing, you're not going to defeat legionaries in the late game, especially after the Marian and Imperial reforms.
Scrappers ready!
These guys are going to be used throughout your entire campaign, and as they get better, and more veteranized, your melee attack and defense will go up, which will make them a lot more useful because their armor piercing damage is good at 13. That's solid, respectable. Weapon damage at 18, but your melee attack is only at 7, defense is at 9. Not very good, but it is a very early game unit you get access to. Build your second level barracks and you get these bad boys. They're kind of going to be your shock troops, sad to say, but they will be effective if you can use them right. Respect them, you will need to rely on them for quite a bit of your killing power.
Gallic warriors!
However, all is not lost in that we do have some excellent swordsmen for you. Here we have the Gallic, early Gallic Oath Sworn. Now the Oath Sworn in Divide Et Impera are very different to the vanilla Rome 2 Oath Sworn. The Oath Sworn in Rome 2 will just chop through anything and everything, including Roman legionaries. Now in DEI, the case is very different because they have no armor piercing damage at just 2. They do have a high weapon damage at 28, and their melee attack at 13 is quite good. So they will actually hit the legionaries quite a lot, but when you're facing Principes and above, man, you're gonna need these guys to have a very good rear charge and just good advantage overall to deal with Roman legions. They can't win in a head-to-head. This is not a mainline unit, in my opinion. These guys are flanking units, as is all of your swordsmen. Actually, I don't think you should be using swords at all for your mainline whenever you can avoid it, which is pretty much all the time. But yeah, fantastic unit, 30 armor too, so it is coming in quite well. They will do good against enemy heavy swords, but no armor piercing, which is really crucial to getting the edge up on the enemy. Yeah, you might beat a legionary in a one-on-one, but you're going to lose most of your unit and you're still going to need some sort of support, whether it's archers, skirmishers hitting the legionary, or another unit outflanking it. So a pure one-on-one, I'd be very surprised if the Oathsworn won, but I mean, who knows, I might stand corrected on that, but
Chosen sword!
in my testing it was not the case. We then have the late Gallic Oathsworn. Now these bad boys, they actually might have a chance of it. They have better weapon damage at 30 instead of just 28. Melee attack is at 15 as well. Defense is at 12 instead of 11. Their armor is at 38. Morale is at 51. So they're just better in every single respect compared to the other Oathsworn. And they have a javelin unit. Oh, and these guys do have defensive formation. Your early Gallic Oathsworn do not, as does neither of your other sword and axe units.
Chosen swords!
So, I wouldn't, if you could avoid it, I wouldn't use these guys as a main line, but you can if you really need to. And you can use that defensive formation
Warriors
to make them
ready!
survive even longer. But this is going to be a high tier unit for you. This is elite unit for you. So you're not going to be able to afford a massive amount in every single army, not for quite a while anyway. But then,
Fearless warriors!
from there, we jump up
Chosen swords!
to your Gallic champions. These guys are kind of like your Berserker unit. Very tough. Although they don't really wear anything, so they're not all that tough in terms of warfare because they only have 10 armor, so they do die easy. Melee defense is at 13, which helps, but their melee attack is at 17, which is very, very high. It's the highest attack unit you have. They have a good charge bonus at 28, which is the same as some low-tier cavalry. So fantastic there. Weapon damage at 32, plus 2 armor piercing at 34. Base morale is at 51. Speed of 3, so they are quite fast. And they do have a javelin. So, again, another flanking attack unit. Do not use these guys as your main line. They will not last. They don't even have the disciplined formation. These are basically the same as your naked spearmen. Flank with both units, actually. Use your spearmen to attack the cavalry or light skirmishes while your swordsman come in and hits the enemy rear line. But yeah, that is all of your infantry. That's it. Clearly lacking in armor-piercing damage. You do have some professional troops, so it's not necessarily that you're just a bunch of grunts that don't know anything. It's just that you don't have much variety. You're not a jack of all trades, and you're not an ace in anything, as is the case for the majority of barbarians. You're just unique in that you have a lot of phalanx troops, but even then, they're in the shield wall, which is different to their typical phalanx as well. Your spears aren't even using pikes. Do they have? Is their spear slightly bigger than the other spearmen at least? It's like barely longer. So I mean, it does help, and the animation does matter for the unit. So the longer spear unit will help, but yeah, not ideal. Anyway, let's jump over to your cavalry, which we have a massive amount of. We have your Gallic early medium cav, medium to melee cavalry unit. Not really a lot to say about these guys. Worth noting that they are only 100 men strong. It doesn't even. Oh no, it does. It lists the horse that they have now. Horse Maripos. The great horses are noble mounts of large stature. They're fierce and strong. So quite good in melee engagements. That's the Gallic cavalry specialty. But I mean, you go against the Eastern faction, your cavalry's gonna get wiped. It just is what it is. You go against Hellenic factions, their cavalry's better. You go against Carthage, their cavalry's better. Unless you can get them bogged down in a long drawn out fight, but even then they do have better cav than you. We do have a late variant as well, which has significantly higher stats, so you want to get this late version as soon as you can, which isn't as good as your general, by the way. Oh wait. Yeah, at least in terms of a couple of things. For example, your general has better armor at 41, so similar to your general though. And I would really try to focus on getting this cav unit, because you need cavalry to do well against other barbarians, because the rest of the barbarians around you, gosh, I can't talk today, guys. I mean, it is almost 2 a.m, so cut me a little bit of slack, guys. The other barbarians around you don't have good cavalry, so utilize that and try to take advantage of it as you can. But that's it for your melee cav. We have 0 shock cavalry for the Arverni.
Light horse!
And then we have 1 single skirmisher unit, your Gallic light cavalry. This cav unit is recruitable on turn 1, so that's nice. You get yourself some more cav, get yourself at least 4 units in every single army, at least early on. You definitely want to get some. Nothing really special about these guys. I mean, you can use them in melee engagements, but their armor is only at 11, so in a prolonged engagement they won't do well. Use them to harass the enemy with their javelins, charge down light infantry and skirmishers, and use their speed to your advantage. They're actually very fast at a good speed of 8. It's one of the highest you can get in the game, depending what decimal it's at. So yeah, I would use these guys a lot though early game, but don't expect a lot from a long tier engagement. That's it. That is it for your military as the Arverni. Very limited overall. If you want to try and play a different method other than using spears as your main line, you really need to go out of your way to do it. And you're going to be relying on mercenary and AOR units. But anyway, that is the Arverni roster. That's it for the military section of this video. So now let's go to the part 3 section of this video, and we'll talk about the final verdict of the faction of the Arverni. Alright everybody, here we are at the part 3 section of this video, where we're going to talk about the verdict of the Arverni. So I'm going to reiterate a few points I have already made. I'll try to throw in a couple new ones, and then we'll give the difficulty rating, at least my personal difficulty rating for the Arverni. So first off, this isn't necessarily easy campaign. It is going to be what I would classify as a bit of a slog campaign. Early game, you're going to need some very smart tactics in terms of battle tactics to win. Your main advantage against the other barbarians is that you have your own brain, right? The AI doesn't. The AI can't do as well as you, at least the majority of people, right? So you can outsmart the AI relatively easily. So you can abuse those bridge battles like I told you to. You can use ambushes in ways that they wouldn't expect or predict. There's a lot of different things you can do, and you're going to have to do it. So your early game is going to be very reliant upon you winning your battles in very intelligent ways. Your mid to late game is going to require overall strategy of your faction to do well. For example, prioritizing getting killing units such as armor piercing units. You need more axemen, you need more heavy cavalry or shock cavalry. Maybe you get yourself some chariots from somewhere, something like that. But you need to have an overall game plan to do well. You can't necessarily just kind of trudge along and, oh, here comes Rome, let's go fight with our armies. You actually need to think a little bit about your army composition and where you can get good units, because your roster as it is pretty terrible when it comes to factions like Carthage and Rome. Carthage you'll be able to kind of go toe-to-toe with for a while, at least until they get into the late game, if Carthage survives. Massalia, they outclass you for the most part. Almost even, considering that it's an AI-controlled faction, but anyway, that's just what that is. So that's some pretty big things to keep in mind. Early game, defined by your battle tactics. Mid to late game, defined by your overall campaign strategy. Moving forward though, your provinces and goals are pretty limited. As I said earlier, you only have a few cities in each province. Something I would consider is trying to expand where there's more of your Celtic culture. For example, there's a little bit of Celtic culture in Britain. I would highly recommend you invade Britain and take it over. You should be able to take it all over within 30-40 turns at most. The factions there are pretty weak. They'll be busy bickering, fighting each other. You can come in and easily third party all of them. It should be a pretty easy campaign. It might even be interesting and a good time for you to experiment with different builds for your army. But the main reason, well, there's two main reasons really that I recommend taking Britain. One, defensive position. If Gaul gets invaded and you can't handle it, worst comes to worst, you can run away. That is an option in Divide Et Impera. You can just move your capital. And as long as you don't lose your capital in all of your cities, you're still going to survive. So you can go to Britain, basically lock down, turn it into an island fortress, and then relaunch your invasions into Gaul when you're ready. Or something along those lines. And then the second thing is that you can bring units from Gaul and use the population that is in in Britain, sorry. You can use the units in Britain and the population in Britain to your advantage. So you can get their chariots, and you can get their two-handed swordsmen, all kinds of units like that. There's not a massive variety, but they are helpful units to you and a very limited roster. So again, I would just highly recommend trying to get Britain under your control. There are some Germanic areas as well that can be useful, although Germanic culture and Celtic culture do not mix well. You're going to have some public order issues with that. And the Germans are very tough. Their military's, in my opinion, easily better than the majority of the Celtic factions. They're very savage, very tactic savvy. There's a lot of guerrilla warfare against them. It's not easy fighting the Suebi and whatnot when you're playing as the Arverni. They will surprise you and they will just really give you a tough time. So fighting the Germans isn't ideal, but they do have land that you can use. So perhaps if you can time your invasion right to where they're busy fighting someone else, coming in and third party them, and it'll give you some nice territory to recruit from, develop your economy obviously, and then also to just have more strategic areas to fall back to. I mean, worst comes to worst, the Gauls can always migrate to Germany. Gauls were migrating everywhere all the time. So it's just something to keep in mind. You can lose your territory in Gaul. It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the campaign. Just think about doing it if you're needing to. It's unlikely, but I just want to at least throw that option out there for you guys. It's a really fun way to play too. I love a good migration. But anyway, prioritize using the advantages that you do have. Despite your roster being very pathetic looking overall, your main source of strength comes from the shield wall. That's where the Arverni shine. Bring out your phalanx units, use them to your advantage, present a very solid line against your enemies, an unbreakable line just about, and then use overwhelming numbers. You're in Gaul, you're surrounded by Gaul, so as you take over these other settlements, you're going to get a lot of population under your command that is already a part of your culture, and thus you can recruit a lot of units in turn to make up for those conquests. So your losses should be made up for easily, and then some, after you take over even just one single settlement. So try to get the Celtic factions under your direct occupation, so you can recruit troops from them, and then use your special ability to make client states in other areas where your culture isn't necessarily dominant, like for example in Iberia or maybe in Germania. That would be a big one where you might just want to have a few client state allies to help you out. And then just a couple of final quick points that basically go in tandem. Massalia should be your main mid-game enemy. They almost always become a juggernaut. Watch out for them, keep an eye on them. They are a bit of a sleeper cell. Before you know it, they will have a good chunk of Gaul and the Alps and northern Iberia under their thumb, and they have serious units. They are serious professionals. They are here colonizing your land. That's because they're powerful. They're more powerful than you. So you need to take them out and deal with them, whether you befriend them and make them love you so they don't declare war on you, or you knock them out early. It's up to you. But just be aware of Massalia, and then be aware of Rome. Rome is obviously going to be your arch enemy in this campaign. Late game enemy, thankfully, because they're going to be busy fighting Carthage and others around them. But as you expand towards the Alps and whatnot, you're inevitably going to run into their territory, and as soon as you border Rome and you're not like a client state already, they're going to want to declare war on you very, very quickly. So I wouldn't even encourage expanding towards them. Keep buffer states in between you and them, at least like 2 provinces wide if you can. The bigger the gap, the better. But yeah, Rome is going to be very hard for you to take on. Basically, the faster you can get to them, the better. But I mean, it's going to be hard for you to do. You're quite a distance away, and you got your own problems. The early game as the Arverni is not easy. I would say it's around average difficulty, if not slightly above average for your start. It's definitely tricky, but you're the player. You should be able to outsmart the AI around you, and all of the factions around you don't have better troops than you. You have basically the same roster as them. It was a very similar roster anyway. They do have access to their better units on turn 1, such as Axemen, but you can get around that and handle it. Use the river crossings to defend, and then you can build up your barracks and then get your better units as well. So that brings us to our final difficulty rating for the Arverni. Now this one I kind of tossed up in the air back and forth a few times. I went back and forth on a couple of numbers. The early game is relatively difficult in my opinion. Mid to late game, it really depends on what happens in your campaign, how hard it becomes. I mean, Massalia might get knocked out by Rome or someone else, or they could become a juggernaut, and if they do, that's a big problem. Same thing for Rome. They could just be busy in North Africa and in the east, and they won't bother you until the very late game, and by then you could just auto-resolve them away, perhaps. It's unlikely, but a lot of your campaign comes down to ifs and buts, and it's not necessarily guaranteed to be difficult. And because of that, I'm going to throw in a 6 out of 10. In my opinion, the Arverni is an above average difficulty rating. They aren't average, they are slightly harder than what I would consider to be normal. It's probably a good starter faction for the barbarians, or the Gauls at the very least. If you don't want to play as the Iceni, who I would say are the quintessential kind of tutorial to barbarian factions. But the Arverni would be a close second place, especially if you want to focus on playing as the Gauls. Their roster, while limited, yes, it still covers all of the basics. You have flanking units, you have a good main battle line, you have good cavalry, and that's enough to get you to areas where you're going to get good mercenaries and area of recruitment units. And you have a massive amount of population around you. You're surrounded by Celts in Gaul. So that's also a really big factor that will come into allowing you to build a lot of armies and use your manpower to overwhelm the enemy. So yeah, it's still not going to be an easy campaign. You got to put in a lot of thought and strategy. But, I mean, there's a lot more factions that are in a lot of tougher positions. And it was almost a 7 out of 10, but I'm going to hit it with a 6. I'm interested to see all of your thoughts down below. Do you think the Arverni is difficult? Am I being too tough, or am I being too easy on them? What do you think? Let me know down below. And of course, please let me know what faction you would like to see overviewed next. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.